Welcome back, everyone. Today we've got something pretty exciting and a bit beyond what we would normally look at, and that is a complete end-to-end TP-link Omada Wi-Fi 6 multi-gigabit small business network. And I've got one or two pieces in here that I'm not 100% sure if I'll actually need, but with that being said, this is basically their top tier of all the Omada stuff. Let's start with the big one as far as I'm concerned, and that is this TP-link Jetstream 8-port 2.5G base T and 2-port 10 gigabit Ethernet switch. So this is a 8-port PoE plus 240 watt out 2.5G base T switch. And this is the core of what makes the rest of this actually matter. So this is a Jetstream switch. It connects with the Omada stuff. The Wi-Fi hardware actually is Omada branded. I have a hardware controller. This is the higher end model, the OC200. There's an OC100. Honestly, I don't think there was a particularly large price difference. This was still $100. We've also got the gigabit VPN router. This is the ER7206. And then I mentioned the access points. These are the AX600 EAP660 HD. Now, why do I have an Omada network? Well, quite frankly, the options that I normally would resort to when a client came to me for a high-end wireless network didn't have the hardware I needed, or what they had was way out of price range. So let's start with mikrotik, my general go-to for a lot of stuff. They don't have any Wi-Fi 6 gear. They have multi-gig hardware. They have wireless AC hardware, but there's nothing Wi-Fi 6 rated, so they were just kind of out. They had no AX devices. And although I normally would have used, TP-Link's access points and a mikrotik's core switch, they didn't have a multi-gig PoE switch yet. There's rumors of one coming soon, but I can't say, well, we'll just have to put the core switch into your network soon, which could be 6 months or a year from now, when they want something today. So it had nothing to do with price or performance or anything. It just was mikrotik doesn't have the hardware I need today. And I considered using a mikrotik firewall at the end of this, but the availability just isn't here. Normally with this class of hardware, I probably would have used something like an RB4011 or an RB5009 at this point. I can't get one. It's not that I don't want to use one, I just can't buy one. So we've got the TP-link Omada gigabit router, which I'm not 100% familiar with, but it should be fairly straightforward, and it integrates with Omada, so it's all centrally managed. That's a nice perk. Unifi, Ubiquiti's Unifi system, is another one I looked at, and they actually have Wi-Fi 6 gear, but it's pointless. So they have a multi-gig Wi-Fi AC access point, and that takes 10 gig in. It's ridiculously expensive. I want to say it's the Unifi XG off the top of my head. I'll throw it in text with the exact model number. And that was above and beyond what they needed, and it was still only AC. So I went and I looked, and they have Wi-Fi 6 access points, but they're only equipped with gigabit uplinks. Which brings me to my biggest gripe with a lot of entry-level wireless hardware. There's no point in having a wireless access point or a wireless router that you're going to tell me is capable of 2+ gigabits in one of its wireless streams if you're only going to give me a gigabit uplink. Doesn't matter. need to give me a minimum of a 2.5 gig uplink. I actually would have preferred a 5, but I understand the price to return. The practicality is nothing's going to actually saturate both of those bands at once at peak speed on an access point. Wi-Fi technology just isn't there. So that brought me to TP-link. And we've spent 5 minutes introducing the fact that these were picked because they're $170. They have central management with this little controller, and they met all my criteria. It was a WPA3 capable business grade access point at a reasonable price with a multi-gig uplink. This switch is not the only multi-gig PoE switch, but was one that integrated with the system and offered what the client needed at the time. I also looked at, there's one available from QNAP that was a 16 port with, I forget if it was 2 or 4, still had 10 gig uplinks on it. But that was like $900, and frankly, at the beginning, the only stuff that's going to be hooked up to this is what's on this table. It is going to be the router and the access points, and I'll probably hook the hardware controller directly up to the router, so this will literally only have 2 APs attached to it. Same thing, gigabit router, I couldn't get the ones that I wanted. This one was like $170. They got another cheaper one, but it's one of those things, if you're spending $800-900 on the rest of your networking hardware, the difference between a $100 firewall and a $170 firewall is not something you want to take a chance on. All right. So, for anyone who skipped the first 10 minutes, and I'll put chapters in here, we've got a bunch of TP-link Omada hardware, and we're going to open it up. The only thing I want to complain about right out of the gate, you can see this foil tape. Amazon shipped this bare box and then just left it on my porch, easily visible. I really didn't want a $400 switch to walk away. So, let's see what's in here. Well, let's quick tour. I've already mentioned port count. 8 PoE plus 2.5 gig ports, 2 10 gig SFP plus ports, 80 gig switching, which, yeah, that math adds up. 240 watt power budget, which is a bit larger than you normally see on an 8-port switch, but they are PoE plus. And this is a layer 2 plus switch with plenty of centralized management thanks to Omada, a bunch of security stuff listed here for source guard, denial of service, that kind of stuff, rate limiting features. The rest of the packaging doesn't really include a whole ton, although there's a lifetime warranty sticker. I'll double check if I have to register for that before I hand it off to the client. And we are going to do a second video once I've unboxed everything, setting it up. Alright, so we get a little booklet that shows basically what we have here. The Smarter Cloud Solution for Business Networking. And it literally shows a controller, one of their routers, and a different switch, but a TP-link Jetstream switch. Includes a bunch of suggested models with various features. We have the EAP660HD, which is the highest end access point that they have. There's a couple of outdoor ones, some wall plate models. The hardware controller, we got the OAC 200. Oh, I guess there isn't a 100. There's an OAC 300 above that, which just comes with a quad-core chip instead of a dual-core for up to 500 devices. That's not going to happen for this particular tenant, or that's not going to happen for this particular client. The VPN router, we got the ER7206, which is a dual-core, 1 gigahertz, 1 SFP WAN, 1 gigabit WAN, 2 gigabit WAN LAN, 2 gigabit LAN. Yeah. And then Jetstream. This switch is, yep, here it is, TLSG3210X HP-M2, which is the 2.5 gig. There is a SG3428XMP that probably pairs pretty well with this switch, and an SG3452P. Realistically, the 3428 in most environments is what you're going to want to pair with this. That's a 24 gigabit port plus 4 SFP plus with 24 port, PoE switches. And the reason I say that one is you'd normally pair a switch like this as your core for things like Wi-Fi. Set it over there for a second. Along with another switch with user access ports, things like phones, stuff that you don't necessarily need 2.5 gigabits to, but you still need power and data. Not only is that not uncommon, that's usually how I do things when there's multi-gig involved, and having 10 gig uplinks on the switches makes life easy. So taking a look here, we get basically all the basic stuff. So I've got 8 LEDs here. I kind of wish they were above the switches. Green is 10 gig. Orange is 1 gig for the 2 SFP plus. For the 8 2.5G base T ports, green is 2.5 gig, yellow is 1000 meg. It blinks for activity, and then PoE is green delivering power, green flashing over budget, orange fault. On the back, pretty straightforward. We have one power in port and a ground. Kensington lock, looks like a couple of Phillips screws holding the whole thing together. So let's find a screwdriver and open it up. Now, we're not going to take any of the heat sinks off, and the reason for that is this does have to be installed for a client, and I don't want to do anything that could compromise the potential performance. So unfortunately, anything hidden under a heat sink is going to have to stay hidden under a heat sink, because this was purchased outright for install at a client site. None of this is review hardware sent in. I think I missed one screw right here. No, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2. Oh, there's the one I missed. I knew that I had an odd number of screws. I was just looking in the wrong spot. All right, and with those out. All right, so I brought the camera down a bit so you can see some of these things. Pretty basic layout. Unfortunately, we can't get under these heat sinks without damaging anything. And since this is a client system, I'm not willing to do that. We've got a pretty standard power supply over here. This cable here is DC 12 volt 2 amp. That's 24 watts. Should be all of the logic as far as everything's concerned. This cable here is our 53 4.5 amp cable for the actual PoE power, and that all checks out. That's about 250 watts here. That's another 25 watts. Total power draw should be in the ballpark of like 275 if you were using PoE Max and had it running full tilt, which is exactly what I expect out of this. Beyond that, not a whole ton to say. I've got a WinBond chip here that looks like it's a serial interface. The front panel, real quick, has a portion of LEDs here, but has two console connections, one USB, one RJ45, and that serial interface probably talks to the CPU. I'm not 100% sure. So there's a chip over here that could be converting USB to serial to then talk to this, or could be converting serial to USB to talk to this, because only one of those is going to come through in a method that it needs translation. And it came with a serial cable, for what that's worth. It didn't come with a USB cable. But then this needs some out-of-band way to communicate with the physical chips for the 8 2.5G base T ports. I don't have a circuit diagram. Without pulling this out and looking at the back side of the board, I can't 100% for sure say which chip is doing what and who's communicating in what way, other than noticing that they're here. Alright, so that one's unfortunately too small to read. I put it under the microscope, but that's at work, and I'm unfortunately not going to have time to do that. These are marked DQ48201-1PG. These will look like the... they're the physical interface for the actual ports. We've got our WinBond chip here. It is a 25Q256JVFQ. And then there's a Zentel A3T1GF40CBF-GM. And I think that's probably storage. Switches like this generally have somewhere in the order of 256 megs, 512 megs worth of storage for configuration and various bits and pieces of data that they may need. And I say 256 megs. It may be as little as 16 megs. It really depends on how much is in ROM and how much is configurable. Beyond that, I think I mentioned these are held in with epoxy. So these are 3-pin Sunon fans. The fans are EF40201BXQ18C-F99. These are 12 volt, 1.44 watt fans. And theoretically, you could replace them. They don't look too difficult, but you would have to contend with that epoxy. I don't know how loud this thing is yet. We'll find out when we power it on. But that's basically it. That's the insides on the SG3210XHP-M2. Not a whole ton to look at. So I'm going to close this up. And we'll move on to the Gigabit VPN router next. One thing I do want to note before I switch to the router is, as far as mounting options are concerned, it comes with both rack ears and rubber feet if you were putting this in an environment where you wanted to put it on a bench top. Alright, so here's the Gigabit VPN router. This is the ER7206, which is the higher end model. Realistically, it looks like they're distinguished by the presence of an SFP plus port and a few hundred megahertz of CPU. If this Omada guide is to be understood, it says the ER7206 has a dual core 1 gigahertz chip. The ER605 has a dual core 880 megahertz chip. Now, that doesn't say anything about the instruction set. One could be A53s, the other could be A72s. I don't know. So let's see. High security VPN says we support up to 100 IPsec, 50 PPTP, 50 L2TP, and 50 open VPN tunnels. Firewall policies, multi-WAN, load balance, multi-net DHCP. Not 100% sure what I'd use that for. It says these require the use of an Omada hardware controller. Good thing I've got one. You wrote firmware upgrade, normal normal small business firewall stuff. Once again, we have the lifetime warranty sticker on the box, and then a whole lot of not much else. I would like... I'll get a picture of that later. There's a little sticker they put on these boxes that mentions the model, the version, the outside dimensions, and the gross weight, which is a nice touch from a shipping standpoint. So in here we get a little itty-bitty install guide. Tells you some of what the LEDs do and things like that, where your modem goes, etc. That shows a picture of the 605, which this is a new model, so I'm not surprised that that manual doesn't have the 7206 shown. Wow, this is a heavy little router. So we get power cord, a little bummed on the power cord choice, I'll show that in a minute. Some rubber feet, and then not much else. So, here it is. And I said I wasn't pleased about the power cord, and the reason for that is this little 3-pin IEC plug. I know they did it because of space. That's a smaller socket than the regular receptacle you get on these cables. Some people like to call this Mickey Mouse ears. But, I mean, there was room for this. It just would have been a little tight. And that would have meant that it and the switch use the same cord if you ever need spares. Not that this is uncommon. This isn't a cable that I don't have spares of, or that is ridiculously expensive or hard to find. It's just a bummer they don't use the same one. So, a couple of things here. No rack mount option, which is a bummer. This is intended to be used with rack mount switches, and that leaves it to just kind of sitting on something. There's a screw hole here. I don't really know what that's for. And on the front, we get a more conventional configuration where the ports have the LEDs on them. Power, system LED, SFP WAN, which is this port here. Not a whole ton of places terminate as SFP WAN that I've encountered, but it's not impossible either. That's really it. So on the front, you'll notice that these ports are all marked a bit differently. Port 1 is intended to be WAN. Ports 2 and 3 can be WAN or LAN, and ports 4 and 5 are LAN only. So in my configuration, I'm probably just going to use ports 4 and 5 to go to the switch and the controller respectively. So with that said, let's get a look inside. One, two. And the fact that none of these have bottom mounting channels ruins my original idea of putting this all on some pegboard, which is a bummer. So with those out, this should, yep, there we go, just slide out. And once again, the CPU is obscured, so there's nowhere near as much as I would have liked to have seen, although a couple of interesting things here. Number one, the ground pin on the power cable is connected directly to the chassis. Not sure how much I like that, but it's an interesting thing to see. Looks like we've got a 250 volt fuse in there. A little small power supply is integrated into the board. That is good and bad. So in the case of the switch, the power supply was a separate board, which meant that if the power supply failed, you could replace it and only it. The integrated power supply here means that if the power supply or any component of it fails, the whole router needs replaced, or you've got to get a soldering iron out and replace the individual board component that is the problem. Now the advantage here is that it's smaller, and for a 5-port gigabit firewall, it's fine. For a piece of business equipment, I still would have liked to have seen a separate PCB at minimum for the power supply. I understand in this class of equipment at the prices that these are, you don't typically get hot swap power supplies. So on a higher end switch, and even some of the mikrotiks at this point, you'll have one, if not two, power supplies in the back that can be removed while the device is running if one fails. Here, power supply failure means the device is offline, even if in the switch it's theoretically replaceable. So anyway, with that little bit of rambling out of the way, we don't really have a whole ton going on here. We've got these DG36001G devices, and if I am not mistaken, these two are responsible for the last four ports, and this one here, this DG1801G, is responsible for the primary WAN port. Out back, it looks like I've got two chips, and let's see if I can get those at an angle to read them. SEC137K4BZ2G16, which would be cool if I had a little more context for what those were. Gonna guess it's NAND. No, I'm gonna guess those are RAM, just because it wouldn't make sense to use two separate NAND packages. Of course, without a decoder, I don't really know how big they are, and it doesn't tell me in the little booklet or the manual. I'll put it on the screen when I figure it out. But anyway, one interesting thing to note is that this housing, which connects the front panel LED, has an unpopulated section because there's only 3 front panel LEDs: power, system, SFP, WAN. And I'm surprised that they didn't get a different housing that only contained a single LED, but maybe there's another model of this that uses that for something else. I can see here a single unpopulated pad that appears to be pinned out for an RJ45 connection. My guess would be that's for a console connection that's not present here, because it looks like there's that 4-pin header, room for a surface mount serial conversion chip of some port, and then another connection here for I don't know what, something. There's also room for what looks to be 2 additional filtering capacitors over here, as well as a... this board was designed to be multi-power in. And the reason I know that is that this pad here and this layout here would have been for a barrel jack connector. So this board was designed to be multi-voltage, and presumably if that was the case, we would have seen at least this capacitor added as well. I wonder why they opted not to. Because dual power makes sense. Maybe there's going to be a ER, I don't know, 7207 or something that brings in another power method. That was just generally a nice feature inside business equipment. Next up, we've got this little hardware controller. Honestly, I might actually run this differently than I had intended. So the hardware controller here is basically an auxiliary brain of sorts. PoE in, hybrid cloud tech, 2-port 10100 LAN ports with a USB port, and it takes 8023 AF PoE or micro USB in. That's why I said that I might do this differently, is I might just hang it off the primary switch and take advantage of the PoE power option. Beyond that, does this say lifetime warranty on it? It says business solution on it. For support and warranty, please visit TP-link.com/support. It doesn't really tell me a whole ton. Oh, there we go. There's a lifetime warranty sticker. I just wasn't looking at it. So we get another Omada booklet. An install guide. The device itself, and a little short on the equipment here, guys. So there's a clear indication here of how they expect you to use it. And the reason I say that is because the primary application for this controller is someone who has a couple of access points, like those AX3600s that I've got. And included is a couple of feet, which could go on the bottom. There's a couple of mounts here so you could hang it from something. Micro USB in the back, and then port 1's marked PoE in. Not 100% sure what you'd use port 2 for on a device like this, but typically it's just a single connection. But they didn't provide a USB power source. So the hint here is that you're supposed to use PoE. They gave you a network cable, which I'm sure is only, it's only 5E because this is a 10100 device. But the idea is that you'll plug PoE into it and then just stuff it somewhere because it's just a controller. So, I don't expect there to be a whole ton exciting to see in here. But we're going to take a peek inside anyway. So, yeah, that's kind of in line with what I expected, although there's no heat sinks. So finally, we get to see what CPU's inside something. Looks like there's an Atheros chip in here, an an AR8236-AL1A, which is interesting. But yeah, so PoE in, I can see a little bit of power circuitry here. There's a capacitor in the back if you do use the micro USB. Let's see here. Anything else exciting of note? No, USB here. We've got a D1203G and a Group Tech HST-1207DXR physical interface. I assume that's for the PoE in. We've got a Marvel. Okay, so the Atheros is the switch chip for the ports. There's a Marvel. God, they can't print these any smaller, can they? That's a 68F3-BVB2. Then we've got a NAND package and a memory module in here. And that's all there is to this particular board. This one is small enough and simple enough to get into. I might try and get a microscope shot of that before I install it, but I'm not going to promise it. Couple of interesting things to note. This is a USB Type A port. If this is anything like other controllers I've seen, that is for storage, for backups. The OC300 supports rack mount installation, which the OC200 does not. And yeah, basically they show the network topology I planned out without seeing their diagram. We have a router, PoE switch, a OC200 controller hanging off on the side, and then client devices, which in this case is just going to be a couple of ceiling mount OAPs. The management device is going to be my laptop initially, and then whatever the client wants to use after that. But that'll likely be connected wirelessly, which is technically not ideal, since you can lock yourself out that way, but it's not like he won't be able to go to the closet if he does that. Alright, so a little tricky to put back together, but not bad. Yeah, it's all back together. Pretty straightforward. Interesting to see that they're using Marvel and Atheros chips together. Typically, some of the larger Atheros chips have CPUs in them, so you can get a combo ARM CPU plus switch chip in one go, although usually those have Wi-Fi included as well. Now the part that everyone's been waiting so patiently for. Let's get a look in one of these access points. And one thing out of the gate I'm going to give TP-link full credit for is that every device I have opened has a lifetime warranty. Not that I plan on blowing any of these up, but that's reassuring. Typically, mikrotik stuff comes with a 1-year warranty. Some stuff I've seen has 5 or 10s. Lifetime warranty is nice. So here's the AX3600, 5 gigahertz 2.4, 2402 megs and 1148 megs. This is marked as high density. This is technically their top of the line Omada access point as far as I'm aware. All these little booklets have so far said the EAP 660 HD is at the top. There's a 620 and a 625 that are steps down. The 625 is only an AC device. And then there's an outdoor. There's an EAP 610 outdoor, which is an interesting model. None of the wall stuff is even AX. So this is as big as TP-Link's wireless gets right now. Pretty typical stuff: cloud centralized management, cloud management, high density. We've got the 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port, which is the whole reason we've got all this stuff. Seamless roaming. Haven't really had any issues with that on the mikrotik or the unifi stuff. A little diagram on how to install the thing, and just, you know, a reiteration of your features, some security stuff. These do support WPA3, another reason why these were picked. The zero-touch provisioning, not sure how well that's going to work. Honestly, as long as the adoption is as easy as I'm used to with other stuff, it'll be fine. Advanced wireless, seamless roaming, etc. Secure guest network option with multiple authentication options. Facebook, SMS, voucher, etc. Does it say how many devices? It just says 4 more devices. One thing I wish they wouldn't do, and this isn't TP-Link, everyone's guilty of this. So they show Wi-Fi 5, 2333, Wi-Fi 6, 3550 megs a second. This is not capable of connecting a single client at 3.5 gigabits a second. For one, it's only got a 2.5 gig Ethernet port. There's no way you could reach that speed. For two, they get that number by combining the 5 and 2.4 gigahertz frequency capabilities together. It's not a single device. At no point am I ever going to see 3550 if I run an iPerf test or something on my internal network through this wireless access point. It's bad marketing. Unfortunately, they all do it because once one did, everybody else had to. Why is this only, I don't know, 2402 and that guy's is 3600? Well, the reason is because it's not actually 3600. It's 2402 plus 11 whatever. So here's the access point itself. An AC adapter. Some mounting hardware, some washers, some screws, a couple of wing nuts, some wall-based mounting hardware that looks like, little GPL notice, the same Omada booklet I've seen a couple of times, quick install guide for the wireless access point, which suggests using their app. Talks about standalone mode via the PoE switch, via the power adapter. And this should be our ceiling plate. So the typical way of doing this is that this plate goes onto a ceiling, and then you would tighten it down. Now one of these is usually keyed so that this is easy to remove, and I don't see that here. Oh, I guess you just twist hard. Okay. The unifi stuff I'm used to, you've got to like slide something in. And then here we've got a reset, a 12-volt 2-amp plug, and our Ethernet. And it looks like this is only held together by 4 screws, so we're going to take a peek inside. Alright folks, so screws notwithstanding, I have not found a way to pry this open without damaging it. Not that I don't want to look inside, but I gotta put this on someone's ceiling tomorrow. So I can't really scuff it up too bad. And I've broken a couple of tools and already had to rattle some pieces of plastic out of it. When I started, this was an entire plastic little guitar pick, so unfortunately, unless TP-link wants me to actually review one of these and is willing to send out a unit, I'm not going to bust open this one and damage the housing. And it's not that it would be difficult to do. There's a series of tabs all the way around that snap together to make this basically impossible to open. Alright, so with that out of the way, since I cut that out, I am going to reiterate, I would have liked to have seen a PoE injector included instead of this DC plug. That's got 2 benefits. Number one, if you don't have PoE, you can still put this wherever you want and not have to worry about having an outlet installed near it. Number two, if you do have PoE, it gives you a free injector. Even if that raised the cost on this by 10 or 20 bucks, I think that would be well worth it. That's how a lot of the other adapter or access points I've seen are. And I understand that may, how do I put this? And I understand there's places you look to cut costs, and that may have been an appealing one. Quite frankly, I think it was the wrong one. Number one, it means that they had to include a barrel plug here. Number two, that now means I've got a 12-volt 2-amp brick that I'm basically going to stick in a drawer and have to deal with forever. Other things that I would have liked to have seen differently, this plate will work. Not a huge fan of the included mounting hardware, but it looks sufficient, because what's going to happen when this gets installed is I'm going to line it up. I'm going to hold this up to a ceiling tile, put 4 dots on it, drill 4 holes, run these up through, throw the washers on the opposite side and bolt it together, which I haven't looked, but is probably what it suggests. These are weird. I think these are if you want to mount it on a wall. Let's see, hardware overview, rear panel. Yep, 6mm diameter holes for 3M by 28 plastic wall anchors. Two issues there. Number one, these anchors suck. They're not wedge-shaped. They're just these odd 5-sided anchor. These aren't going to hold very well. Not that it's got a ton of weight, but this is a fairly large thing, and it does have, I'll weigh it when I get a chance, probably a good 2 pounds to it. Number two, I don't own a 6mm drill bit. Not that no one owns one, but most people in the US, which is where this is shipping, this is the US model, it comes with a US plug, we're not going to have a 6mm drill. Now, you can use, what is that going to be, 1/4 inch to get there? And it'll be close, but it's not going to be perfect, which just leads to these not working very well. I would have liked to have seen the style of anchor that has little spurs on it and is generally conical in shape instead of these, or just something better. Other things to note, no Ethernet cable. Not sure how much I expected for 170 bucks, but I kind of expected an Ethernet adapter and a PoE injector, especially since TP-link makes them. Anyway, so far, the Omada hardware has been a little bit different than what I was hoping some of it would be, but overall feels well built. All the switches, the controller and everything, it's all steel. The access points have a mounting mechanism that, although not necessarily what I really wanted, will work just fine. There's nothing wrong with this plate. It's the other mounting hardware that is the issue. And these, they're just suboptimal. There's nothing wrong with them. I would have liked to have seen a drop ceiling mount option instead. But anyway, with all of that said, should you run out and replace your home network with this? Probably not. I bought this for a small business where the $1,000 investment for this stuff is actually a reasonable expense. At home, although I personally run enterprise networking gear, most of you probably don't need to, and if you do, you don't need this kind of capacity, typically. And what I mean by that is these are big Wi-Fi 6, high density, high capacity access points with 2.5 gig uplinks. Unless you're going to run brand new Cat 6 to everything, it's probably overkill. Now, could you do it? Absolutely. And depending on what you need, the biggest expense might be the easiest one to avoid. This switch is $400. In fact, I think it was like $410 when I ordered it. It's got a $399 MSRP. The only place TP-link lists it is Amazon, and that meant $400. Now, do I think that's a fair price for a switch? Well, yeah, that's a little bit more, but in the same ballpark what I paid for my CRS 328. Now, I get a lot more use out of my 328 because it's a 24-port PoE switch, but they're all gigabit. I got a lot of wired devices, though, so I need more ports, more than I need 2.5 gig, and it's got 4 10-gig ports for my server and my desktop. That said, the average user probably be perfectly fine with a smaller switch, even one of the cheaper, like $200 2.5 gig switches without PoE, and as long as you put the access points somewhere that you have an outlet, you can use these. I would have liked to see injectors instead. I'll link an injector that does 2.5 gig as well if you wanted to go that route. It's not as neat, but it saves you $400. I mean, these, they're not cheap, but they're reasonably priced. They're $170. This is technically optional. They have a cloud-based controller, but I was not willing to install a business network and rely on the cloud controller. So this is $100. Supports up to 100 access points. And will be perfectly fine. Not absolutely necessary just to use these access points. This thing, there's a smaller model that would be fine for home use. Even so, this was $170 and that one was like $70. In the grand scheme of all the other hardware, this made the most sense for this customer. If you said, I just want AX Wi-Fi, I want the 2.5 gig backhaul, well, I mean, one of these is it. That's all you need to start. You can take your own home router and just turn off its Wi-Fi. If you're a total nut like me, well, the whole system looks good. The switch here does have the saving grace of 10 gig uplinks. What does that mean? That means that I can connect my server and my desktop to the 10 gig ports, and then I'll just be happy they can talk at 10 gig. I can hang a larger 16 port 10 gig switch off of them. I can bond the two together and hang a CRS, what is that, the 317, which is a 16 port 10 gig switch, or something else. So these mean that I have lots of options. I'm not just limited to these 8 ports. I'm not just limited to copper. All right. So that begs the question, should a consumer buy it? Maybe. If you've got a big enough house, you're using access points, and you don't mind some of the cost here, go for it. If this is above and beyond what you need, the unifi and the mikrotik gear that I've looked at previously, probably a better option. Mikrotik access points you can get for $100. The HAP AC is a 5-port switch at the same time and will run off PoE. And if you can get it at normal prices, the CRS 328, which will act as the controller, is about $300, $300 to $400. Different systems for different applications. TP-link, I hope they carry this system forward and I start to see some of the things that I noticed that I'm not 100% happy with addressed. Couple of things I would like to see change. I mentioned the kit for the access point. Realistically, having to have a router and a separate controller is the old way of doing things. I should have been able to buy, I don't know, an ER7206 Plus or an ER7026C that included the controller hardware built in. I'm not upset there's a separate controller since there is a cloud option, but they're really one of the last ones doing it. And I get it, they're kind of late to the game on some of this. They've been making switches and consumer stuff for a long time. Their enterprise gear and stuff like this is a bit behind other people's systems, so they ran forward and jumped ahead of everybody on this. All right, and we're going to do a setup on all of this, hopefully in the next video, as long as editing doesn't turn into a nightmare. So, with all that said, I'd like to thank anyone who helps support Pocketables, either by using our Amazon affiliate links or by supporting us on Patreon. It is support like that that helps make videos like this possible. I would encourage anyone who has any questions or comments about any of this hardware, anything I glossed over, in just the general unboxing and the gist of it, to leave us a comment below or join us on Discord. There will be a link to that in the description. As always, I'd like to thank Electrix for providing our opening and closing themes, and finally, thank you for watching.